Hello everyone, welcome to the TA session on MVP module. We'll be starting shortly. Till then, it would be great if you could say hi in the chat box and post your questions over there. We'll be starting the session shortly with the questions which we have already given, and then we'll take on the question which we will post in the live chat. Also, if one of you could post in the chat box if my voice is audible or not. Cool, thanks. I think it's audible. So we'll start off the session now. So the first question which we received from you guys is, how do you actually identify the riskiest assumptions, right? So if you look at the video lectures also, like we actually covered a couple of examples. One was about Airbnb and the other one was about the desert subscription service, right? So I'll say that A, entirely depends on the kind of business you are in, right? And B, it will depend on the market research and the user research which you guys will be doing before launching the MVP, right? So uh, by doing that analysis, you will get to know that this particular thing is actually riskiest for my startup, right? So I have to validate this before launching the product. And the riskiest assumption, they will vary as your startup or the company grows, right? So what risk assumption you have right now might not be the case 1 year down the line, right? So 1 year down the line, you might have assumptions which I wouldn't say riskiest, but it would be somewhere around whether to go for this feature or that feature, right? So it will vary as per your product growth. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. We'll move on to the next question now. So there's a question that what if there are multiple primary assumptions on which the product is dependent, and these assumptions are independent? How do you go about creating an MVP for such a product? So actually, it's a very good question. Actually, depends on a couple of like few things basically. One would be so once you have listed down all the assumptions and you have identified or arranged them in order of riskiness, right? So what you can do is basically then analyze what is the condition of your company, right? How much cost you can afford if you want to execute or implement the uh, build part of the MVP, right? So it will depend on the cost, it will depend on the effort, it will depend on the complexities involved, right? So mainly these three factors, effort, cost, and complexities, will help you determine that whether I should test all the primary assumptions at the same stage or whether should I go one by one, right? So it will depend on your situation. You have to take the call there and there, then and there itself. Also, guys, if you have any more questions, I would request you to please post it in the chat box. Oh, actually, we received one more question, which is from the next module, Agile. So that will be covered in the coming TA session. Do not worry about that. Someone else would be taking that lecture, right? So that will be covered. If you have any more questions related to this particular module, MVP, please post it now. We've actually gone through all the questions which were sent to us. If you have any more questions, please post it on the chat box. Yeah, so we have a question from Anjani. Please explain the build stage mode. Didn't fully understand the concept. So build stage mainly comprises of you have the idea about your market, right? Market and maybe some idea about users. I won't say that, but at least about your market in which you are actually, starting up or have an idea, right? So what you'll do is basically you write down all your assumptions, whether is it riskiest or a simple assumptions, right? As we saw in the desert subscription service, right? Then the build part is mainly the first stage of that particular cycle in which you'll think of a particular way in which you can present your product, a sellable product, a viable product to the user, in which you have uh, less amount of money or less cost involved to your company, where you can uh, implement less resources and gain more out of it, right? So that is the objective of the build phase, right? And they actually go hand in hand with the other two phases, right? So if you have built something, like if you want to gauge, let's take an example, right? If you're starting up Grofers, right? Like you were the first one to think of that idea in India, right? And you were to, you wanted to gauge demand, at how the market will behave, whether the users, they are willing to buy groceries online or not, whether they will change their behavior from traditional buying on, like let's say a roadside sabzi wala, right? so whether they will shift or not. So what you can do is basically conduct a small experiment, right? You can, whether you can conduct that in your society, or you can take few offices, right? And there you can just start off with a small, like this particular example you covered in the lecture also, you can start with a small WhatsApp group, or you can create some FB page or some landing page, right? Where you can gauge the interest level, where you can get your first few orders, right? And what that will do is, so this is what you're building, right? So when you're building and when you're actually putting it out in front of the market, you'll also be measuring that how many page visits, how many number of orders you are getting, like how much attention you are getting from the people, right? So this will come under the measure part, and that finally would come your learnings, right? That once you have implemented the entire model manually, right, on the road, right? So now how you can actually automate it, convert it into a tech product, right? Something which can be a further stage below, like above MVP, right? So those learnings would be crucial in enhancing or refining your build part, and then again actually going through the cycle of build, measure, learn. Okay, so the next question is from Jensen. Riskiest assumption can be subjective. I'll need more material on that, Jensen. If you could please elaborate, because I'm not able to understand what exactly are you referring to. So if you could please like give an example or anything like to clarify this question. Next up is from Snail. Snail, I'd request you to post this question in the next TA session, because this is for more sort of for this module, and this question is relates to a different module. So we'll take on there. This question will take on there. And again, this session is for minimum viable product module, not for other modules. We will have TA sessions and the time allotment for other modules also. For so, I'd request you to please like restrict or stick to the agenda of this session. I have one more question from Krishna. This again, I have actually mentioned that we will be having a TA session on Agile module next week. So there you can raise the question, and the relevant person would be in a better position to answer this. So guys, if you have any more question on minimum viable product, please ask now. So we have one question from Aquiline that when creating MVPs for multiple simultaneous projects, B2C facing different stakeholders, how do you rationalize what is sufficient? Do you tear after each point, or do you build each independently? So very good question. That will actually be covered in your module 8 and 9. So that will be something like whether you should go on and building each feature independently, or whether you should do it simultaneously, right? What you as a product manager can do is define the use cases for any particular feature, right? And we like we if we take MVP for a feature, you'll define all the use cases which are possible, right? And then there are a few techniques or frameworks which you will learn in your module 9 or 10, I think, product roadmap, in which you'll learn that how do you categorize the use cases into must have, should have, and would have features, right? So that's a particular method known as Moscow method. So that you'll learn in that. And basically, and apart from this, there is another technique in which you look at different parameters like effort, cost, and complexities on behalf of your team, right? And then you take a call as a PM that whether to work on this feature first or the other one, or whether to work on them simultaneously, depending on these three factors. So the next question is from Meha. In the Zappos example, why is the number of order one of the metrics, and why was it required to measure demand in terms of type of shoes and size of shoes? So we haven't explicitly mentioned it that it was like in the lecture that number of orders was a metrics or not. But if in order to come up with the types of shoes and the size of shoes people are ordering, you would anyway get the number of orders you are receiving, right? And this further categorization or segment, basically breaking down of number of orders into the type of shoes and size of shoes was required, because you will get to know which particular type of brands and the types are in demand, right? Because if you look at Zappos, they started in 98, right? So at that particular time, buying shoes online was itself a big deal, right? So you can't really go and stock up all the different types of brands and types and sizes available. You have to build on gradually by like taking like the shoes or the style or the design which is actually in demand right now. You'll leverage on that, and then you'll move on to the next one, right? So I think that was the ideology of the founders that time. So Krishna has also posted that we have a submission of module 9 this week on 5th. So I'll check with the program team once and I'll revert back to you. If this submission is on 5th, then definitely we'll have a TA session on module 9 before that. But just let me check with my team and we'll revert back. Next question is from Snehil, that to what extent is the prioritization matrix used while building an MVP? So it depends actually. Like we have covered two cases for MVP, right? The first one is to validate or invalidate your idea, and the second one is that once you have actually validated it and you are running a company, then you are launching out multiple like features one after other, right? And you are actually providing like you're launching the MVP for the features, right? So there, the idea of prioritization matrix comes in handy, and that's what I refer to when I mentioned that in module 10, when you will be developing product roadmap, right? When you will be designing the product requirement documents, right? So you'll be writing all the use cases, and they will learn about two more frameworks which you can use to prioritize your cases while building the MVP for the feature, right? And it actually depends, because like as a PM, you would be able, you would want your users to have the best user experience possible, right? But there would be some amount of business restriction, management restriction, and there that cost versus complexity versus effort required would come into picture. Guys, if you have any more question, please post it on the live chat. So if you don't have any more questions, we will be closing the session shortly. So guys, we'll be closing this session now. Thanks a lot for attending the session. All the best for the assignment, and I'll be posting the chat, like the feedback form in the chat. Uh, Please fill in the form so that we get your valuable feedback. Cool then. Thanks a lot. I'll be closing down the session now.